Good morning, everybody. If I can get you to gather together and have your attention. So welcome to our conference this morning. We had a wonderful start last night, and it's great to see many of you back again this morning. Thank you. What we're doing today is we're having the table set up so that it helps students and faculty come in and out of classes and helps the conversation move along. At the end of each session, we're going to have questions and discussion periods, so there's lots of time for interaction. I want to draw your attention to the exhibits over here. This is not a poster display, it's rather we opted to do exhibits, and there's some interesting exhibits in there, and as the day goes on I'll be explaining some of them to you. We'll have some of the exhibit people have a word with you as we make transitions from one presentation to the other. I also want to say that it's delightful to inform you that this conference has been arranged in the celebration of the spirit and mission of the university on the integrity of creation, the topic being the global water crisis. So it's a delight to tell you that we have this entire conference arranged as a carbon offset conference, and Professor Schroef from the business school on our planning committee enabled us to get that done. So our carbon footprint for this conference, bringing people in from distances by using aeroplanes and driving cars and using taxis, we've been able to arrange this as a total offset, carbon offset. So it's a carbon-free conference, and we're really thrilled to do that. It's always a nice thing to arrange. Those of you who are guests from outside and you're parked, remember that you can take your parking sticker and use that at the exit of the parking garage to get your $5 rate. Also, I want to have a word of thanks again to our committee. We have this splendid faculty committee that arranges this conference every year. It takes a year of planning. You can see by the details of the conference how much work is involved. And we are so thrilled to be able to bring in these, not just prominent speakers from around the nation and the globe. These are people who have shaped the debate. These are the pivotal speakers in these fields. It's a great honor to bring them to Duquesne University to talk to you as our community, as our faculty, and as our students and our staff. It's a wonderful thing in the Academy to bring not just the prominent names, but the pivotal names, and the people who are actually shaping the debate. So to begin this morning's session, I'm going to ask Professor Jane Moriarty from the Law School, an endowed chair at the university, and one of the members of our committee, to introduce our first speaker. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you, Dr. McGill. My name never sounds as nice as it does when Jerry says it. Moriarty. I'm going to pull this down a little, I'm short. Thank you all for coming out so early to join us for Dr. Robert Glennon's presentation, Moral Stewardship of Our Most Precious Resource, Water. For many reasons, I'm thrilled to be able to introduce Dr. Glennon. He is the Regents Professor and the Morris K. Udall Professor of Law and Public Policy at the University of Arizona, and the author of 2 award-winning, best-selling books on the topic of water. They offer a sensible blueprint for achieving a sustainable water future. He is an expert in water policy and governance, and by all accounts, one of the leading experts in the world on the law of water. Dr. Glennon received an undergraduate and law degree from Boston College Law School, and I just want to say that makes both of us members of a tiny but select important group of double eagle BC law professors. And we are thrilled to have the only other member of that group here today. He also received a master's and PhD in American history from Brandeis University, another school in Boston, but again, not BC. He served as a law clerk to the Honorable Anthony Julian from the District Court of Boston and was a fellow in legal history at the American Bar Foundation. After several years as a professor at Wayne State University Law School, he joined the faculty of the University of Arizona College of Law in 1985. Professor Glennon is a prolific author and is best known for his book, Water Follies, Groundwater, Pumping and the Fate of America's Fresh Waters, which received accolades from Scientific American, The Washington Post, and the New York Review of Books. His second book, Unquenchable, America's Water Crisis and What to Do About It, was published in 2009 and was awarded the Rachel Carson Book Award for reporting on the environment. And then in 2014, he co-authored another book on water, how the market can mitigate water shortages in the American West. And those are just his books. In addition to his well-known and frequently cited, you are really well cited, Professor Glennon, academic publications, which include dozens of scholarly articles in addition to his books, his work appears in a number of national press publications, such as the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg News, and Huffington Post. He has appeared on various television and radio programs, including many NPR programs and The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. And since we're streaming live, John, if you're watching, a nation needs you. In 2011, Professor Glennon was featured in the 2011 documentary Last Call at the Oasis. He has been a visiting scholar, fellow, and distinguished professor at universities in Australia, Japan, and the United States, including Puerto Rico, which is in all of our thoughts this week. Professor Glennon has received 2 National Science Foundation grants and serves as water policy advisor to Pima County in Arizona and is a member of the American Rivers Science and Technical Advisory Committee. I wanted to tell you that so that we can appreciate what it's like to have such a highly regarded scholar in this area and how proud we are to have him here. His work is important, it's impressive, it's persuasive, and it could not be more timely. We are enormously grateful that he fit us into his very busy schedule, and we are so very honored to have him speak here. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Robert Glennon.
Thank you so much. That was above and beyond. Appreciate it, Jane.
It's
Thank you.
my pleasure.
Jane, thank you for those comments. We went to school together at different times, as the old thing said. A large number of years before Jane. It's great to be here. I am very grateful to Jerry and to the university for putting this together and inviting me to be here. I think Pittsburgh's a great city, and when I get back here, I just am amazed at the way those 3 rivers come together. Last night I had to come in from the airport. That was not such a treat. It took about 50 minutes because there was a game last night. You know, your Penguins were playing across the street, so everyone was coming in through the tunnel. This morning they've arranged it in circles. The real reason is that that's so that you can eat and drink while I speak. Jerry asked me if that would be a problem, and I said, well, no, I'm a university professor. And at the University of Arizona Law School where I teach, the classrooms are wired and the students have access to the full range of the internet. I mean the full range of the internet. So if you get up and have another coffee or another pastry, I won't be disturbed and I'll be able to go on. So I'd like to do 4 things this morning in time with you. First, I'd like to talk about the situation globally. Then I want to narrow it down to the United States and tell you a little bit about the situation here. And then I hope this isn't too simplistic, but in a way the problem is one of supply and demand. So I'd like to work through some of the demands, what's happening with the supply, and then finally I'd like to turn to some solutions. I'm optimistic. We have the tools available to fix, to address, to solve the global water crisis. First, the global picture. The global picture starts with some stuff that Nancy talked about last night in her wonderful remarks. And it's a fairly sad one. It's something that's shocking to those of us in the United States who, with rare exceptions, have wonderful water, pure, clean, safe to drink. But around the world, of the 7 billion people on Earth, more than a billion lack access to good water. There are 2.6 billion people who lack access to adequate sanitation. And very troubling, as Nancy pointed out last night, are the large number of people who are dying from waterborne diseases, including cholera, and most of those, of course, are children. The 7 billion of us now on Earth is going to jump, depending on which of the scenarios of fertility rates you want to select. It's going to be enormous or huge or pretty substantial. There doesn't seem to be any easy out. Just taking the median level, we will hit 9+ billion people by mid-century. So in 33 years, 2 billion more people on the globe with us. Where are we going to find the resources, including water, to food and house another 2 billion citizens on this planet? And then there's global climate change. And global climate change is very disturbing on so many levels. Whether the events in Puerto Rico and in Houston and in Florida, throughout the Caribbean recently, whether the wildfires that have been raging in Montana, whether those are due to climate change or to just the variability of climate patterns, I don't think scientists are prepared to say definitively. But all of these arrows are pointing in the wrong direction. And the ones that relate to ocean temperature and ocean heat content are the things that fuel hurricanes. And is it just a coincidence that for the first time in 160 years, that region suffered 2 Category 4 storms in 1 year? Just a coincidence? Could be. But when all of the arrows point in the same direction, at some point in time, you have to scratch your head and say, you know, there's something to this. And the scientists whose stuff has been reported, especially Justin Gillis in the Times, this year was hot, hotter than last year, hotter than the year before. You can already read his January 18 headline in the Times. It'll be the 4th year in a row. Of the 17 hottest years in the 150 years that they have been keeping such data, 16 of the 17 years have occurred since the year 2000. That's statistical improbability. Now, consequence of this. Farmers consume 70% of all of the water that humans divert for everything. Power generation, industrial, domestic use. The consumption is overwhelmingly by farmers. And farmers are going to need more water to grow the same amount of food. Never mind the additional 2 billion of us. And where's that water going to come from? This is Oroville Dam in California from earlier in this year. They had a big storm, last winter, big rainy season that ended the drought in California. And Oroville Dam just couldn't take all of the rain that was coming into the reservoir, and they started releasing it, and the dam started to crumble. 180,000 people needed to be evacuated from the Oroville area. And that showed very dramatically that we have not kept up the water infrastructure. It's old and it has not been maintained well. There's an important point about this structure, though, that has to do with climate change. Yes, the dams are old. Yes, they've been poorly maintained. But they were also built on an assumption about the climate looking like this, and now it turns out to look like that. And that's important for the following reason. Dams, with the reservoirs behind them, serve 2 main functions: water supply for cities and businesses and farmers, and flood control. And they were set up on an assumption that the flow pattern in a year looks, the hydrologists would say the hydrograph looks a certain way. But what's happening with climate change is that there's more rainfall, less snow, later snow coming in. Earlier in the winter, it's no longer snow, it's rain. Earlier snow melt at the other end, and more runoff. So the dams are getting overwhelmed with water at a time when they weren't designed to take it. And the storage that we think of in the West with the big reservoirs is only part of the storage. The real storage is up in the mountains in form of snow. That's where we store water in the West. It's the snowpack. And when you don't have that snowpack up there, then you have liquid water, which is, of course, much more prone to evaporation loss. So all of these things this applies across the globe, not just in the United States, suggests that we have some very difficult challenges in front of us. So in the United States, I've written a couple of books on water. This slide would have looked very different a year ago. But the snow in California, the rain in California, the storms in the east, even the recent ones, have completely changed the picture. So really there's not much drought except for Montana. And oh my golly, I was in Montana in late July, early August, and the wildfires are just extraordinary. Unfortunately, this is what climate scientists have been predicting. Maybe not as many storms, but more ferocious storms. And across the globe, whether it's hurricanes here or cyclones banging into coming in from the Bay of Bengal into Bangladesh, places are getting inundated with more ferocious storms at the same time as they're seeing more wildfires of enormous destructive capacity. There's some good news, very good news actually. In 2010, the USGS released its annual 5-year report of estimated use. And virtually across every category, we've done pretty well. We're using less water now than we did before. In some places, quite a bit less. In cities like Phoenix and Las Vegas, they're using about the same amount of water as they did 30 years ago, even though the population in many of these cities has increased by hundreds of thousands of people. And why is that? Well, there's a number of things going on. One, not so good. That was the Great Recession, and people just started leaving their homes, or no more discretionary water use. That was one part of it. But another part of it was government rules and regulations. And for those people who think, oh, it's just the government passing useless things, I would submit quite the opposite. The Clean Air and Clean Water Acts have had a powerful impact on the companies that run power plants and on industry generally, encouraging them to use less water, to create fewer emissions, and that's had a very wholesome effect on our air and on our water supplies. And then the EPA has had this water sense program where they've promulgated standards for things like toilets, shower heads, faucets, and those over time have come to be implemented and installed in most homes. So all new homes these days with a front-loading washer and a low-flow toilet and low shower head fixtures are using a heck of a lot less water than in homes in times past. And even in the last couple of years, you're seeing a tremendous change in places like Las Vegas and even Los Angeles, where they're starting to rethink the role of lawns in our outdoor landscape. Still, we have some challenges. This is Lake Mead, the iconic bathtub ring, showing just how far the water has come down from when it was once full. And the Colorado River is facing a problem. It's really a supply and demand problem. And a piece I did for the Grand Canyon Trust last year tried to flesh this out. So if you add up all of the water rights to the Colorado River, you come up with 16.5 million acre feet. An acre foot is enough water to cover an acre of a land to the depth of a foot, acre foot. So that's 16.5 million acre feet. But there's a problem. The tree ring scientists at the University of Arizona have discovered that over the last 1,000 years, the median flow in the Colorado is not 16.5, it's 14 million acre feet. And then from that, you have to take away 1.6 million acre feet in evaporation loss off Lake Mead and Lake Powell. So instead of 14, we're now down to 12.4. And then climate change is predicted to have anywhere from a 10% to a 30% reduction, produce a 10 to 30% reduction in precipitation in the Colorado River. So there's a huge problem there, and that's not the only basin that is suffering it. So I think most people here know that 2 years ago, Pope Francis in his encyclical proclaimed that access to safe drinking water is a basic and universal human right. It was a courageous thing for the Pope to do, and it got many people's attention. The UN had done something like that in 2010 with a declaration. And then California in 2012 came out with a safe drinking water proposal that should be universal. But there's a difference here, I would submit, between the moral force of someone with the Pope's stature and even the UN stature and what you can do at law. So in terms of moral suasion, all of these declarations and principles are enormously important. But as a matter of enforcement through a legal system, there's not much there. International law, other than treaties between countries, is pretty squishy. The rights are ill-defined, and how you actually would enforce them is problematic. In the case of the California statute, very specifically they said, this right is not enforceable in courts. Well, why would that happen? Well, that would happen because all of a sudden the water departments of towns that supply us water and private water companies that supply us water were saying, wait a minute, you know, if you write this into law, I'm going to get sued left and right, and what am I supposed to do? I don't have the money to secure this. It's great that you have this idealistic vision of what should happen, but I cannot snap my fingers and make it happen. Well, then is this irrelevant if you can't enforce it? I don't think it's irrelevant at all. I think that change happens in subtle and myriad ways, and when you have the Pope and the United Nations and the legislature of California starting to say, this is the way it must be, you start to see change coming into play. So now let's move on to the supply and demand problem. So not everyone has the same vision as Pope Francis about what should be done with water. And one example of this would be Senator Dianne Feinstein, who thinks it's a God-given right to be able to water gardens and lawns. So that's, and this may have been, like a bad hair day for her, I don't know. It's one of the most, one of the silliest things I think she's ever said, or I think any human being has ever said. But that's the culture that she had. And this is what you get when you take Senator Feinstein's view of the world. An absolutely constructed environment, absolutely manufactured. This is from the Palm Springs area of California, east of LA. On the right is the real world, and on the left is the constructed world. And if you look virtually, every house has a lawn, many of them have pools. This is the vision that she thinks is God created. All right, well maybe our moral philosophies are not entirely in sync. I don't think that's what the Pope had in mind, but it does show how you can invoke the higher being for pretty much anything you want to achieve, I suppose. One of the great but very acerbic writers from Arizona, Ed Abbey, said, plenty of water in the Mojave Desert unless you try to establish a city where no city should be. Well, what city would that be? That would be Las Vegas. So this is, as I expect many of you know, the Bellagio fountain. It was Steve's Wynn poster child, and when he wanted to do this, he went to Pat Mulroy, who was head of the Southern Nevada Water Authority. He said, look, this is my vision, a water feature. I got to have a water feature. I'll do anything you want, but I got to have a water feature. So he did. He built this spectacle. It cost $40 million for the fountain. Has a footprint of 8 acres. Holds 27 million gallons of water, and has 250 heads that spray the water up into the desert sky. For some, it's the epitome of wastefulness. It stands for everything, for the wretched excess that epitomizes Las Vegas. But there's a different side to it. All of that water is recycled. Because Pat Mulroy said, okay, you can have your water fountain, but are you prepared to recycle the water? Are you prepared to clean up the water that's in the basement, install a reverse osmosis system, install low-flow fixtures in every hotel room, instant on hot water? She had a long list. And he said, yeah. And he did it. The stunning thing about Las Vegas and the Strip is that it uses only 3% of Las Vegas's water. Yet it's the economic driver of the state, second to none. And so as we start to think about water, there's an economic cast to it. Water is an important spiritual, has important spiritual and cultural aspects to it, religious aspects to it, but it's also economic. And we need to be thinking of that as we move forward. There are other people using water. This Jennifer Aniston asking us to buy smart water, which is basically plain water with a bunch of almonds in it. Well, you get the same amount of protein if you ate a handful of almonds. I was the first to point the finger at bottled water in 2002 in Water Follies. It hasn't stopped. Nestle continues to engender hostility around the country. Bottled water is a curious phenomenon, with very few exceptions. More recently, unfortunately, because of Flint and some other things we heard about last night, there was absolutely no need to drink bottled water. With very few exceptions, the water across the country was perfectly fine, in many instances better than what you were going to be buying in a plastic bottle. The bottled water industry, as Peter Glick has shown, however, engaged in an absolute campaign to discredit and undermine people's confidence in the public water supply. And that's one of the things that has affected how people generally think about water, is they've been told, well, you better drink bottled water because that's safe. When, as Nancy pointed out last night, there's no guarantee it's safe at all, because it's regulated by the FDA, not by the EPA. I think bottled water is interesting as a kind of narcissistic element. It's just, there it is. I can do it, so I choose to do it. But it's not the only thing that I think is rather wasteful. This is one of my favorites. This is Kohler's Power Shower. The shower has 10 shower heads, each with enough water pressure to take paint off walls. These are very popular in Phoenix, which is why we in Tucson look down our noses at people in Phoenix. So there are some indulgent, whimsical, wasteful uses of water, demands for water. But there are also demands that are very key to our future well-being as a nation and as a world, and one of them is for energy. You know, as we see, unfortunately, in Puerto Rico right now, if you have no electricity, no energy, everything comes to a halt. As you know, there's been a lot of controversy about ethanol and also about fracking. I don't have a dog in either of those fights, but what I find curious is how much water it takes to create ethanol. So even in an ethanol plant that recycles its water, it still takes 3.5 or 4 gallons of water to refine 1 gallon of ethanol. All right, 4 to 1, so if it's 50 million gallons, so that's 200 million. But first you have to grow the corn. Now that's not too bad if you're from Minnesota east or eastern Iowa east, where you dry land farm. But any place west of that, and it's all irrigation farmed. And corn is a very thirsty crop. It can take 2,500 gallons of water to grow enough corn to refine 1 gallon of ethanol. And Congress, in its wisdom, said we should have 36 billion gallons of biofuels in 10 years. Now you need a scientist to do that math. 36 billion times 2,500 times 4, that's higher math in my judgment. There's a lot of zeros at the end of that. And I wouldn't have believed that something seemingly so innocuous as ethanol could be so water intensive. And as you know, of course, that's water that would be used for growing things. Corn, they're fighting with the food industry for that corn. But energy is something that we just can't get enough of in the United States. The demand just seems to be insatiable. Here's a company that has a big demand for energy. It looks like kind of a Sam's Club or Costco building, right? Go get your large bottle of bleach. But it isn't. This is Google. Google? Yeah, it's Google. It's what they call a server farm. And inside, there are tens of thousands of computers, all linked up, all generating heat, all need to be cooled. So you need the electricity to run the things, and then you need the air conditioning to get rid of the heat that they dissipate. And this is the name of data in 2017. Every time you do a Google search, this is what kicks in. One of these, doing your search for you. And Google announced a year or two ago that on YouTube, which Google bought, we, all of us, upload 100 hours of video every minute. Those videos of your cat are just not that interesting. We want 24/7 reliability in our access to what the Cartesians have done lately. And that's what the cloud gives us. There's no cloud up there. The cloud is right there in these hard buildings. And Amazon Web Services is the only thing that Bezos is making any money on. He sure isn't doing it by selling you books at a discount. Microsoft is in the game. Facebook is in the game. Google is in the game. Cloud services, it's where the action is. Now, there is tremendous economic development and growth that's coming from this. It's reducing a lot of overhead. It's making there are a lot of cost savings from having such great data. But it takes water. So what are we going to do about this? If you're still with me, I think I've outlined how there's a lot of demand, but there are strains on our supply. What are we going to do about it? Well, we can't just keep going business as usual. So what is business as usual? What that pretty much means is you divert more water from a river, or you drill a new well, or you build a dam. And here's a photograph of dams. We in the United States are really good at building dams. Bruce Babbitt once quipped that we have built a dam every day of every year since Thomas Jefferson signed the Declaration of Independence. I mean, I can't believe you people are still letting those rivers flow. 3 rivers, they could be 3 dams, 3 reservoirs right there. Just stop it. And I've got the agencies who will help you do that. The Army Corps of Engineers and the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation are 2 federal agencies, and their entire mission is to stop water from moving. Well, that's not going to work. We've dammed pretty much everything there is. So if you think you're going to build a new dam and solve the water problem, you haven't thought very hard or long about where you're going to do it, what the political and environmental opposition will be, or how much it's going to cost. Third thing we've done is we've drilled wells. So divert from rivers, build dams, drill wells. We have so overpumped so many of our aquifers. This slide just jumps off the page at me. It's a dated slide, but it's from the Central Valley of California, and shows you the amount of land subsidence that occurred from random pumping or reckless pumping of aquifers. So the land used to be way up at the top of that pole, and now it's down to this fellow's feet in a matter of 50 years. So how does that work? Well, if you think of an aquifer as a giant milkshake glass, and you think of the water that has accumulated over thousands of years in it, that's the water table. Everything below that line is the water. And what the law in many states and in many countries around the world permits is a limitless number of straws into the same glass. You can just put a straw in and pump to your heart's content, as long as it's reasonable. What's reasonable? Anything. Well, that's not reasonable. No, of course it isn't. It's an oxymoron. But that's the problem. It's a classic example of the tragedy of the commons. You have a common pool resource, and let's be clear, water is a community resource. It's not a private resource. When you get to use water, it's a use right. It's not an ownership right, in the United States at least, except for Texas. And Texas is just weird. So the tragedy of the commons says finite resource, limitless access to it, you're going to eventually exhaust the resource. And so drilling more wells is not a viable option. So business as usual, more dams, more diversions, more wells won't do it. Some people think we can seed clouds. Cloud seeding, weather modification is the term that the people in the industry would prefer to call it. And this is an example of that. You shoot some silver iodide up into some clouds at a time when you think there's a lot of moisture in the area, and then you just sort of hope it's going to rain. Well, the scientific community, the National Academy of Sciences, did a big study on this and said, after 6 decades, there's no proof it works. But that doesn't keep people from still doing this, still engaging in cloud seeding. But I just ask you, are you prepared to commit the security of your water supply to these 2 guys? Okay, I rest my case. So what else is out there? Well, if you can't get it nearby, how about you go someplace else for it? So this is a billboard from Michigan that shows you what they think we in the Southwest are all about. Well, I taught at Wayne State for a while, and so whenever I'm back in the Midwest, and particularly back in Michigan, I put this up and I scold the audience. I say, shame on you. This is a scurrilous attack on those of us in the Southwest. We have no interest or desire to divert all of the Great Lakes and bring them to the Southwest. Frankly, we would be happy if you just let us take one of the smaller ones. So business as usual, big trans-mountain diversions, all this stuff, that ain't going to get the job done. Just not going to happen. So what can we do? What are the real solutions, not the phony solutions? First, conservation. This remains the low-hanging fruit. Let me give you 2 things that each of you can do that maybe you've thought of, maybe you haven't. First, stop using your kitchen food disposal to get rid of food. If you use that disposal 2 minutes a day, by the end of the month, you're likely to have used about 150 gallons of water just to get rid of food scraps. Just to get rid of food scraps. So I'm a big fan of Immanuel Kant's The Categorical Imperative. If what I do, if I do something and everyone else does the same thing, will the world be okay? And here's a situation where if we all just stopped using our washing machine, our food disposals, we'd save collectively a heck of a lot of water. 150 gallons by yourself isn't going to change the world. But it's a principle of trying to think about using water in ways that respect the value of water. The second thing I think you can do is turn off a light. So scientists at Virginia Tech have disclosed that it takes a heck of a lot of energy to run light bulbs. One single 60-watt incandescent bulb that burns 12 hours a day may, by the end of 1 year, use as much as 6,300 gallons of water to produce that electricity for one 60-watt bulb. It's just stunning how much water it takes to produce energy. So those are 2 things. Turn off a light and use the food scrap. Don't use the disposal to get rid of your food scraps. So conservation. What are some examples? Well, some others are just try and take a page from the book of others who are very mindful about water. I find in Arizona and being around the West that Native American communities often have an incredible spirit of long-term sustainability. On the Hopi Reservation, where I've spent some time, the Hopi have 20 different words meaning water, some form of water. They're very mindful about how they use water. And so I think we could take a lesson from Native American communities in that regard. Some people are doing exactly that and really trying to go outside the box. This is a water harvesting system. Looks like a silo you'd see in Nebraska. Well, that's because it was a silo that was manufactured in Nebraska. But this is on San Juan Island near Seattle. And this couple decided that they were on an island, they had a well, the well was starting to get salty, and it was deep down farther and farther before you hit the water table. And so they decided to start collecting water off the roof. And so there's a roof system that collects it, stores it in the silo, and then it treats it for their domestic use. So they are off the water grid by putting in this water harvesting system. Not everyone has got the message of water conservation, however. I just love this photo. The caption's better. So this is the middle of the drought, and this is a water board member who's washing down the driveway of his business. Just, hello, anyone home? No, no one's home, not in that guy. So we could do better with conservation. This is an ad, public service announcement at Las Vegas.
Can I help you? To find your watering schedule, go to changeyourclock.com.
Las Vegas has a different sense about what's appropriate for television than some other communities. But yeah, hey, it would work for me. If you threatened me, bodily harm, okay, I got it. So we can try and be persuasive, and I can try to tell you, encourage you not to use your food disposal. But Las Vegas is just a little more direct, threatening you with bodily harm if you don't stop conserving water, if you use water to water the sidewalk rather than the lawn. So conservation, first and really important tool in our kit. Second is reuse. Okay, I'm actually not here today to encourage you to elbow Fido out of the way. That's not what I'm about. But I am here today to tell you that Fido's on to something. That what we have in the potential of reuse is simply amazing, and we're not taking advantage of it. In Los Angeles, they have a plant, the Hyperion Treatment Plant, that takes all of the water from all of the homes, many of the homes in the area, brings it together, treats it, and then what do they do with that water? They dump it right behind the plant. That's the Pacific Ocean. Virtually every drop of this. And this is a huge plant. It produces a plant, it's not the Ohio River size, but it's the 7th largest river in the United States, and they dump every drop of that into the Pacific Ocean. We can do better. We should do better. In Arizona, we reuse a lot of water. In Phoenix, they reuse water for a huge nuclear plant west of Phoenix, about 60 billion gallons a day. So that runs on recycled water, reclaimed water, effluent, different names for it. In Tucson, we use it to water golf courses, parks, cemeteries, highway medians. Google's starting to use some reclaimed water in some of its server farms. It's a tremendous opportunity. This is water we already have. Don't get rid of it, keep it, and use it for something else. Now, it's not a silver bullet, and I say that because it may be expensive. Often it's going to require a separate system of pipes and valves, and that means, in an established city, you're going to have to actually break up the streets, and that, when you start ripping up concrete, that gets mighty expensive. So it's easier to do in a newer subdivision, a newer neighborhood, than an older neighborhood. But the opportunities for recycling are nothing short of fantastic. So that's a second arrow in the quiver. Third, what about desalination? Someone, great poet, water, water everywhere, not a drop to drink. Well, we can do desalination. There's a plant that just opened in Carlsbad, California, the Poseidon plant that was brought online a couple years ago. We have the capacity to take salt out of water. But it, too, is not a silver bullet. It depends on using a heck of a lot of energy, because it's all done under high pressure, reverse osmosis, pushing water through these very sophisticated membranes. The membranes themselves are very expensive, prone to fouling, require frequent replacement. And then the third problem with desal is, what do you do with the salt that's left over? It doesn't go away. All you've done is you've taken the salt out of part of the supply, and all the salt remains in the rest of the supply. So let me tell you a little bit about the Poseidon plant. First, it took them 20 years to get a permit. They started in 1998, maybe 19 years. Came online in 2015 or 2016. Long time for one plant. Second, they divert 300 million gallons of water a day. They treat 200 million gallons of water a day. They get 50 million from that 200, leaving 150 left, which they mix back with the ocean water and put it back in the ocean. So it's like a Rube Goldberg kind of way of going around. It's not very direct, it's very expensive. Still, there are places where you may find that you have a very high value for the water, and so desal will be part of the solution. So desal is the third of our option. Conservation, reuse, desal. Price signals. I want you to pay for water. I didn't hear that. Let's try that again. I want you to pay for water. Pretty good, really. But some of you are saying, you're not serious, are you? Pay for water? That's communist stuff, right? You can't do that here in the United States. Well, we're spoiled in the United States. We wake up in the morning, we turn on that tap, and out comes as much water as we want for less than we pay for cell phone service or for cable television. Many of us in the United States, when we think about water, we think about it like the air. It's infinite and inexhaustible, when for all practical purposes, it's very finite and very exhaustible. Now, when I start talking about asking you to pay for water, I get a lot of pushback. Why should I do that? It's a human right, some people say. Other people say, I already pay for water, a lot. And then I would usually ask, oh, really, how much? I don't remember. Well, if you paid a lot for water, you would remember. The point is, you really don't. And even if you do remember and you say, I paid $45, well, what was that $45 for? Well, I don't know. I wrote it out to the municipal water department or to the private company that's regulated by the State Public Utility Commission, and I made a check out for $45 to them. Okay, I know you sent someone some money, but it wasn't for the water. It was for the cost of service. There's no commodity charge for water. So try that next time you need gas. Pull into the Shell station and say, hey, you just want to pay for the cost of electricity to pump. You don't want to pay for the gas. That's sort of what we have in the United States. And then, even more bizarrely, in some places, you don't pay anything for water. Literally, there's no charge. In other places, it's combined with sewer service, and in some other places, it's combined with trash pickup. So you get a bill maybe once a month or every 3 months, and it's for water, sewer, and trash collection. So you really have no idea what you're paying, and particularly you have no idea how much you've been using when. So even if you were a good-spirited citizen and you would like to conserve water, how do you know where to begin? There are answers to that. They have smart controllers and timers. We could do it so that your cell phone now gives you 24/7 reliability. I mean, of course, to the Kardashians' videos, but also to your water bill. And you could see what you were using. They have systems that are so good, they can tell you if you have a leak. They can tell you if your use went up in some abnormal way. There's a problem, though. These systems, they cost money. A lot of money. As I go around, I meet engineers and inventors who have built better water mousetraps. They have built these timers and other things like that work. But almost to a person, what is so sad is that none of them has a viable business plan because the cost of water is too low. The cost of water is too low. Why would you buy a $700 timer for your backyard when your water bill is $25? Just not going to happen. You don't have the right incentives in place. So this sets up the conflict, privatization of water. And I've written about this. In Bolivia, Namibia, South Africa, there have been some legendary fights over water. And usually at the other end is some big transnational out of Europe. Veolia Environment is one, Bechtel on another occasion. And I think it's really summarized by these two quotes, I think. Because people would like there to be universal access to water. And that is an aspirational goal. In places like Bolivia, the government is either too weak, corrupt, or inefficient to do this. They have no ability to police the private sector. So the private sector does what they want. On the other hand, they don't have any money to do it themselves. So it's really a kind of catch-22. And what has happened in places like that is that when the private company has come in and spent, for example, as Veolia did, a couple $100 million putting in a water system, well, guess what? They want that couple of $100 million back. And they want to make a profit on it. That's what they do. So if you want them to build you a water system, you have to figure out some way to make sure that there's a revenue stream so that they will get their money back. Otherwise, they're not going to do it. We can do it if we vote to do it ourselves and have our own governments do it. But in a minute, I want to address that because that is one of the big challenges in the United States. And Nancy talked about that last night. She had a couple of great slides that showed you the decline in federal investment in water and wastewater in the United States. And this, if you think after '08, when it's the states that really have no money, the feds still have plenty of money, truthfully. They just don't want to spend it. So where's the money going to come from to fix this? Nancy talked a lot last night about Flint. Wonderful talk. I did a little thing for Scientific American about Flint last year, saying, it was a crime, an absolute crime that children drank poisoned water. What a despicable thing, and people knew it. And they didn't do anything about it. And was there racism involved? You bet there was. It was just a horrible thing. But in another way, remember that big circle that she showed last night of cities that are losing population? Almost any of those cities could have been Flint. Tucson could have been Flint. All it takes is a little deferred maintenance, actually a lot of deferred maintenance. And then suddenly you create the conditions where you could have some kind of bacteria enter the system, and then you then the wheels start to fall off. And so what I find sad about Flint is that we have this strong tradition of 150 years of virtually universal access to water. We had that. What people are now declaring we should have, we had that, and we're not maintaining it. And what for me, as a principle is, when people start to refer to what Nancy did, the point of use filters, you know what that is? That's opting out of the system. That's saying, I'm going to take care of me and my family. I'm going to put something in that fixes my system. But then that person, that family, has no skin in the game for whether the public system ever gets fixed. They don't care. They've got their own filter. And who are these people who are likely doing this? Well, they're probably people in the higher end of the income spectrum. Precisely the kind of engaged, literate people that need to be putting pressure on public officials to fix the water system. And they're the ones who instead are opting out. Now, this is a tough one. When I talk this way in the presence of a public official, especially if we're on the DS together, the public official sort of slides out, leaves before I finish talking and denies that he ever met me, never saw me. There's no interest in this. I mean, to ask a public official to say, I want to raise your water rates, that's called term limits. But I don't care about that. And the reason why I don't care about that is I have tenure. There's some exciting things happening around the affordability of water. There's a new government report that's due by the end of this month, that would be Saturday, about this. What can you expect people to pay? Because right now what we have in terms of water is we have typically flat rates, or even more bizarrely, decreasing block rates, so that the more you use, the less you pay for that final unit of water. That's truly bizarre. So what I advocate for is we need increasing block rates, seasonally adjusted, so the more you use, the more you pay. If you want a pool or a lush landscape, you can still have it, but you're going to pay for it. But the threshold here, in my way of thinking, is first, for people of modest or low income, we just have to get them water. It should be universal. And so we need to make that commitment to our people. If the richest country in the history of the world cannot make that commitment, it is a sorry statement. So I advocate for a human right to water. It's not that much water. Sandra Postel and Peter Glick have looked at this. It's about 12 to 15 gallons per person per day. Multiplied by 300 million of us in the United States, what do you get? You get 1% of the water we use every day. So people who say, oh, you shouldn't be able to charge for water, I flip that on their head. You have to charge for water. Otherwise, people don't value it. So the whole thing for me about stewardship, moral stewardship over this resource, is it's an obligation to ensure that it's not wasted. And one of the things that you have to do there is you have to charge people. You can't charge people if they don't have any money, so you give them a modest amount of water. But after that, all bets are off. We all need to pay for water, and we need to have it adjusted so that the more you use, the more you pay. So price signals, I think, are a very important fourth tool. Right now, unfortunately, what's happening is what someone dubbed the conservation death spiral. So because revenues of water departments are pegged to the water that people use, when the drought hit in California and after '08, when people left their homes and started using less water, revenues went down. People weren't using as much water. So what that means is that then they have to raise water rates to recoup it. Well, how about that? The town begs you to save water. You save water, and they say, oh, that was great. Here's your bill. Huh? So it's the conservation death spiral. And so what happened in California was that the Department of Water Resources this past year allowed these water departments to ease up on conservation standards. They finally get their house in order. They finally have a strong program of conservation, but because the revenues suddenly tilt down, they're saying, well, now we have to figure out some way for people to use more water in order to bring the revenues back up. So it's what I call, and this is a woman at Arizona that dubbed this, the hydro-illogical cycle. So you start with drought, which makes you aware. That brings on concern and eventually panic. But it rains. And then it's problem solved. Apathy all over again. The hydro-illogical cycle. So market forces. This is the fifth, I think, in this list of tools that we need to be using. And I wrote about this in a book I did for the Brookings Institution and the Woods Institute at Stanford called Shopping for Water. I brought in people I've worked with and written with before, a lawyer and an economist. And if you're interested, Brookings, you can get it, download it for free from the Brookings Institution website. My publisher, Island Press, has my books. My books, by the way, make wonderful birthday presents. And for this one, you don't even have to pay. So if you have an e-book reader, they've arranged for you to get an electronic copy of it for free. So what we did is we were very frustrated. And this report's a little more down in the weeds of actual legal doctrine. We rolled up our sleeves and got more technical than I have been here this morning in my remarks to you so far. But let me give you the concept. So markets move water from lower value to higher value uses. They allow people to come in and use items in a way that's more efficient. They allow people to specialize, so you make the boots and I make something else, and we trade goods, each doing what each does best. You know that line. But there is something to it, and there is something about the incentives. So the opportunity for trading in water is immense. Remember, farmers use 70% of the water, consume 70% of the water. So farmers in the western United States who grow alfalfa are going to net about $920 for each acre-foot of water. In Yuma, Arizona, which is the lettuce capital of the United States, if you ate lettuce in the last several months, it almost assuredly came from Yuma, Arizona, or Imperial Valley, California. And it's an amazing operation they have over there. Very efficient. And they generate about $6,000 for an acre-foot growing lettuce. Intel, using that same acre-foot to produce its Core 2 Duo chips, generates $13 million in value. So the opportunities for trade are simply amazing. But let me tell you, as someone who has written about, I wrote about this in the Wall Street Journal, and not long thereafter, the dean of the agriculture school at my university came up to me, put his arm around me and said, "Robert, do you have any idea how much trouble you're causing me with my donors in Yuma? Put me in, coach. I can play center field. Let me go over it." So I've gone to Yuma, and I meet with them, and we've had a coming of terms. I teach on a course in the Colorado River. Last fall, I had the students in Yuma for 3 days on a field trip. We're going to go back there again this November, and we meet with farmers. And one of the students and I wrote a piece for High Country News about all the great things that farmers in Yuma are doing. You start to talk about trading water, and they think you're after them. And sometimes they are correct. It's the old joke about the guy who goes into the psychiatrist and says, they're after me, they're after me, they're after me. And finally the psychiatrist says, "Look, you're paranoid." The guy thinks, "Well, that may be, doctor, but they are after me." So you see that. Sometimes you see intemperate statements in the LA Times and the New York Times about how much water farmers use. If I read once more that it takes a gallon of water to grow an almond, I'm going to strangle someone. Yeah, it does. It takes 168 gallons to grow a watermelon. It takes a lot of water to grow anything. We can do better in how farmers grow things, because a lot of that growth is in very inefficient ways. More than half of all irrigation in the American West is flood irrigation. Just turn on the spigot, let it flood the entire field. Well, there are all kinds of neat micro and drip irrigation systems now available. But you know what? They're expensive. $2,000, $2,500, $3,000 an acre. Many farmers are real estate rich but cash poor. Where do farmers come up with that kind of money? So the first thing I try and point out is, this is not the end of rural agriculture. Because farmers already use 70%, a slight reduction in what farmers consume translates into a huge percentage for what the municipal and industrial sector wants. So what we think and what we argue for in Shopping for Water is, the goal has to be to protect vibrant rural agricultural communities. They're the backbone of much of the United States. We certainly don't want to do anything to compromise them. And we certainly don't, looking at a globe with 9 billion people. We need to be supporting farmers, making them able to grow more food, not taking the water away from them so that they can't grow food. That has to be the goal. So how do we do it? And so what we've called for is a program of municipal financing, where the municipal folks provide a revenue stream that will allow farmers to modernize their infrastructure. And what that does, we think, is it's a win-win. Farmers grow the same amount of product as before with slightly less water. The city people get the water that's conserved, but they pay for the costs of the modernization of the farm infrastructure. And then at the end, everyone is well. So I think the tools I've been talking with you about, conservation, reuse, desal, price signals, market forces, offer tremendous opportunity. These are things we have not done enough of, any of them, either singly or collectively. And so I see no reason to despair. We have the tools. Now what we really need is the political will and the moral courage to act. Thanks. Thank you. Thanks. Have some time for questions? Yeah, have some time for some questions. Please.
Thank you for the presentation. It's very, very informative. I am just wondering why there is not much like social marketing to raise awareness about the shortage of water and the importance of water and what's going on now. Mm-hmm. Do you have any idea or?
There is some. I wouldn't say there is none. There is some. One thing I can tell you in Tucson, where we have a pretty good ethic of conserving water, when revenues at the utility took a hit, the conservation department was the one that took the biggest hit. They weren't going to cut the pipes and the engineering. It was the sort of soft stuff, the conservation. So trying to find a way to do that is not always easy. That said, there are some great programs in, let me give you one example. So the Orange County Municipal Water District, which provides a ton of water in Southern California, decided that it was going to embark on indirect potable reuse. So reuse, okay, that sounds fine, but do we have to drink it? Well, we haven't been drinking it. You could drink it. I mean, not to put too fine a point upon it, but what do you think the astronauts do? Okay, enough. So in this instance, what they did is they treated it with reverse osmosis and ultraviolet light and another step, and they put it in the ground and then they pulled it back out. They did not embark on that program until they had a 3-year public awareness campaign that involved 1,200 meetings of the community to try to get the community on board for reusing water. And it worked, but it took real commitment and it took a vision. We can do this. We have a good story to tell. If we don't do this, you're going to have to try to find water from Northern California that's going to be increasingly expensive and maybe more importantly unreliable. Oh boy, you start talking about the water supply being unreliable, people get attention. Pay attention. That said, I'm actually encouraged. Some recent polls have shown that the American public is very interested in putting money into the water and wastewater system. They understand it's important and it's valuable, and I think we're going to see some change. I don't know what Mr. Trump's going to do. Last night there was a discussion about some of the financing mechanisms. Bringing in private capital is an important part going forward. There are these things called public-private partnerships that do exactly that. I don't have time to go into that right now, but that's one option. The District of Columbia, one of the things they just did was they float, typically bonds, municipal bonds are 20 or 30 years, kind of like a home mortgage. The District of Columbia floated 100-year bonds. That's a deal, that changes the deal, because then just like if you get a 30-year mortgage rather than a 15-year mortgage, your monthly is a lot lower. Run it out to 100, and suddenly things that look to be way beyond your means become affordable. Jay.
Professor Glennon, that was terrific. Thank you. So I'm interested in this concept of commodification of water, but I'm very worried by hearing and reading people like Carl Icahn want to buy up the water table in Texas. We know what he's done in other instances to make money. Is there a serious danger that water could become truly commodified and owned by a handful of people and change the way people have access to water?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, Jane. I think you maybe mean T. Boone Pickens was the one mostly. T. Boone Pickens in Texas. Yeah, same idea. So there could be. It still is a right of use. Before him were the Bass brothers, And they tried to go into Southern California and buy up water rights, only the water rights were in an irrigation district, and it turned out they couldn't sell them. So the farmers were saying, hey, good to have you here. You're going to start growing alfalfa with us? Excellent. Like, no, that's not what we had in mind. We had in mind taking it away. There are a lot of problems doing that. I want to be clear. There is, even though the water resources in the United States are public, there are rights to them, particularly in the West, where there is this system called the prior appropriation system, first come, first serve, and you get a certain quantity of water. You can trade it around, but already that's a system that gives property rights in water in the American West. I think, Jane, where you and I probably would agree is the commodification problem that most troubles us is not people using water to grow alfalfa versus Intel's chips. You know, that's economically productive activity. It's Nestle, you know, taking our water supply, taking our springs from us, destroying our environment, taking public supplies, putting it in a plastic bottle, and making literally billions off it. And I see no reason to tolerate that. There's no need they have to. The economic return to the community is trivial, and it's the future of the supply.
Good morning.
Hi.
I understand that New Zealand and India have given river systems legal status as people.
Yeah.
And now there's a motion before the court to give the Colorado River legal status.
Yeah.
How would this affect the commoditization of water?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was called by a New York Times reporter about that just a few days ago. I'm very cynical about the viability of that case. There was a movement about 40 years ago, early 70s, to let trees have standing. And there was a very important dissent that the law professors in the room know about by Justice Douglas in a case called Sierra Club versus Morton, in which he said that the ecological unit should be able to sue for itself. And he made some good points. He said, look, a ship is a legal entity in maritime law. A corporation is a legal entity. Why not a tree or a river or a unit of life? Maybe the other law profs can join in. I think that's, one, not necessary, and two, will never happen. First, why will it never happen? It will never happen because we have a very strong limit in the United States called standing to sue. This doctrine addresses who can come into court. And there's a lot of policy questions in there about, you don't want just any busybody coming in, something, well, I care about the river. Well, why are you any different than anyone else in the country? And so they say, you have to show a personal interest, that you have had personal injury in fact, in order to sue. And then you have to show that the defendant is the one who caused the injury. And you thirdly have to show that if you win, that the relief that the court would give you would correct the problem. And so that rule is not going away. And the lawyer in New York who wanted to sue for the river, I think, it wasn't New York, I forget where he was from. But I think that's going to be tough to pull off. And I also don't think it's necessary. And the reason why it's not necessary is every environmental lawyer knows is you sue for the river by naming the people who hike along the river and go rafting in the river, and you say, I'm here and you're destroying my river. And so it's the harm to my enjoyment of the river that gets me into court, and I think you're pretty much in the same place. But it has a very interesting resonance for the moral persuasiveness, the moral force of it, saying the river should be able to protect itself. If I may, there's another lawsuit that's percolating through the courts involving a bunch of young people in Oregon who sued over climate change, saying, you're ruining my future. You know, I happen to agree with them. But what's their complaint and against whom? The earth is changing, therefore what? I want an A in calculus? It's sort of hard to figure it in legal terms. Still, it got a tremendous amount of coverage and attention saying, they may not be able to sue, but they're on to something. You know, this is an intergenerational moral issue of how my generation has screwed things up for the next generation, and we need to address it. But I'm skeptical that case will go anywhere. You want to say anything? No?
Regarding that legal approach, I don't think it's frivolous. It is calling upon governments to do their job to protect a future for those children. So I applaud those legal efforts. But my question is about, you spoke about not having a dog in the fracking race, and then spoke about reusing water. Mm-hmm. I would suggest you get a dog in that fracking race because of the use of water, if for no other reason. But in California, they're reusing fracking wastewater on agricultural lands. It's filled with chemicals that should not be used in any. So I just wonder if you could speak to that about, while I agree that reusing water is a really important way for us to conserve, there's lots of ways to do that healthily, but not using fracking wastewater.
Yeah. Those are all excellent points. Thank you for your comments. If I would want to know more about the particular situation you're thinking of, because, and I don't disagree, I think there's some places in California where they're using water that's got trouble, stuff in it that you don't want on your food, or in the roots of your food. In other places, they're treating the water. And in Texas, there have been some companies that have agreed to subject the water from the fracking process to a treatment before it then is sent to do something else. And it seems to me there's so much money involved. This is such a profitable enterprise that expecting frackers to clean up what they've done is important. And I think the fracking water really is in two different ways. On the one hand, it's the stuff that they're putting in to open up the chemicals that they're putting in to open up the vein that is troubling. And then it's when they either pump that water out or have already pumped out water that might not have very good stuff in with it. Good points. I think I've got time for one more, and then I'm holding you from coffee and a break. So one more question. I'll be around for a bit. Please.
Thank you. You mentioned that some proposed laws and rules might only have moral standing more than they might have legal force. Pennsylvania is perhaps special because we have a constitution that says citizens have a constitutional right to clean air, clean water, etc. Do you see that as just a moral nicety and a nice goal, or do you see it actually having some legal teeth?
You know, we've got a professor who teaches Pennsylvania constitutional law. Did he leave yet? Yeah. See, we had the expert. We had the expert here. So what I understood from him is that your Supreme Court's been pretty active in enforcing that. That's a terrific provision. I hadn't heard of it before, and you can make a lot of powerful arguments about this. Why put it in the Constitution if it's not going to be enforceable? You still have problems about who's going to enforce it, you know, which branch, but it's there, and I mean, what could be more legal than something that's in the Constitution? Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Well, I know you've got to stay on schedule, so I really appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Glennon.
Thank you. Thanks.
Well, what a spectacular keynote address to begin our day today. It really is thrilling to have a genius in front of us, a mover and shaker of the nation. Thanks, Professor Glennon, very much indeed. And there is a little bit of urgency. You're all going to have a coffee break, and we'll try to get some water available for Professor Glennon, but he's rushing to a flight which takes off in less than 2 hours to rush him to his next conference. So a very special thank you, Professor Glennon, for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.